Welcome, everyone. Thanks very much for joining us today to discuss Drastic ramifications, how UK businesses can weather the global memory shortage. Um, in order to go through that, there are kind of five subject areas that we're going to really cover. So we're going to cover around what's happening in the marketplace, what impact that has on businesses, what does that actually mean in reality, how are HPE and Pulsant helping in that area? And then finally, some broader strategic conversations and considerations. So helping me with this discussion, we have two guests. We have Paul Atkins, who is VP of Storage at HPE, and Steve Spittal, Technology Director at Pulsant. Paul, Steve, welcome to the discussion. So it's quite a hot topic where we're talking about right now. So there's a lot of discussion and disruptions in both the memory and storage marketplaces. So from both your perspective, and Paul, I'll ask you first, what do you think are the sort of the main drivers behind this? What's causing that concern amongst technology leaders today?
Thanks, Ian. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to speak with you. What is happening in the market it's an overused term, but it's unprecedented. And it's really kind of coming from two dimensions. First of all, the level of spend from a CapEx perspective in the market is truly unprecedented. What does that mean? How do I quantify that? So in the next 12 months, 7 companies have committed $600 billion of spend to build out data centers. That sounds like a lot of money. It is a lot of money, but how do I quantify that? So if you take the US Apollo space program, so the entire 13-year program to put humans on the moon, that was $300 billion over 13 years. This year alone, 600 billion is being spent by 7 companies on infrastructure. So there is high demand, but that is also being met with a limitation in supply. So if you go back, this problem started maybe 2 years ago when the 3 memory and NAND manufacturers were making inadequate profit. So supply was outstripping demand. They retooled their fabs to start producing HBM, high bandwidth memory, to support GPUs. That's a higher margin product. So we've got these two forces where there is genuinely unprecedented demand and actually a great decrease in supply, and the laws of economics says when demand outstrips supply, price goes up inordinately, and that is what has happened in the silicon market.
Interesting. Steve, what's your view? What do you see that's driving this?
I'd echo what Paul said, really. Good morning, everyone. I'd really echo what Paul said there. But the one thing I think another fundamental of economics that kind of maybe exacerbates the situation is the barriers to entry into the market. There is an inability for those suppliers who would like to enter the market to enter the market. So that means that supply will be constrained for the foreseeable future, and the people who have access to capital will be able to invest that capital to further their business ambitions.
Okay, I mean it's pretty unprecedented, you say. So when you compare the 300 billion to 600 billion, that's quite a jump. How much, and it'd be remiss not to kind of touch on this, how much is this driven by AI infrastructure demand? Everything you see is either directly linked to or AI washed these days. How much of that is actually underpinning some of this demand?
Demand is unprecedented, and it is broadly it's from everybody. But like anything, if you remember back in COVID where everyone panicked and bought loads of toilet rolls, there is now a feeding frenzy or almost like a fear of not being in the line for product. The manufacturers are, as in the NAND and DRAM manufacturers, are trying to be equitable with supply, because if they only supplied the Magnificent Seven, we will exit this period and they will only have 7 customers. So ultimately, that is not good for business. To Steve's point, supply is not elastic. If you want to retool a fab or build a fab, it's a couple of years. So we know that we have a problem today, and the resolution, I think the first additional available fab capacity will come in late 27. Micron are building a new facility in Idaho. First production will come late 27. So as demand continues to build, as people continue to panic and maybe overbuy or forward buy, that's exacerbating the supply challenge. I think also maybe what is not really talked about or fully understood, part of my region, I also cover the Middle East, but I think it's something like 74% of the world's NAND, and a very similar percentage comes out of South Korea. The vast majority of South Korea's energy supply comes around the Straits of Hormuz. 100% of the helium needed in advanced silicon manufacturing comes around the Straits of Hormuz. So mercifully, things look like they have settled. But again, that has been another challenge. Again, like another COVID analogy. Just when you think that was going to get better, that ship got stuck in the
Suez Canal.
In the Suez Canal. And so this is just, it's another hit to the market, making sure we've got energy costs are up, the suppliers pass that on, there is no helium, that goes up, that gets passed on.
Wow, so there's a number of things that are interconnected there, and even the slightest change, or indeed major changes we've seen recently, can really impact that. So, I mean, Steve, I want to ask you. So, from the client conversations that you have on a daily basis, who within that client base is the most concerned, or who should be the most concerned, whether it's technical teams, procurement teams, or business leadership? Where do you see these conversations being held within that client base?
The touch points are kind of various. I mean, the people that react most immediately are the people that hold budgets. So people that have a requirement to deliver solutions for their business and a budget to deliver that solution. Those budgets are now in jeopardy or at risk. That concern or risk, if you like, goes up through the business and permeates up, and then businesses are going to have to make some choices about what they do and how they do things. Certainly, if they have projects in stream that are kind of that are contingent on one thing being successful before another thing takes off, I think that's really impacting things. So we have two streams really. The immediate reaction are those people, IT managers, maybe IT directors, that are holding the program for the year. And then we have the people that are responsible for the business risk, and maybe whether that's addressing the market, whether it's addressing shareholders or ownership around how their capital is going to be brought to bear in the given financial year and what benefit they can see. So there's a short-term immediate reaction, and then there's a longer-term kind of business factoring reaction as well.
Okay. Well, and that leads us really nicely in terms of onto the impact on businesses. So, we've talked about what we're seeing in the wider marketplace, but let's try and bring this a little bit more personal in terms of actual, whilst not necessarily sharing client names, but Paul, could you talk me through some sort of examples, especially around where we're hearing that the price of memory, of storage, is fluctuating, and by fluctuating I mean going higher and higher and higher, and actually the time of which that is held by some of the suppliers has been reducing. How's that? I guess, have we hit that bottom piece, or is that something that's still going to rise over the next year, 18 months, 2 years? What's your opinion there in terms of that business impact?
So, I mean, it's obviously what I see in terms of my role, but we get informed by analysts with a much broader view of what they think is happening in the market. Working with analysts is like working with opinion polls. They're almost never right, but directionally, and what I mean by that, Ian, is every time they've said it's going to go up by X, it's gone up by double what they projected. Because again, this is genuinely unprecedented. So I'm very sympathetic. The challenge. So I guess the first point, we are not at the top of the market. Demand is high, and people are prepared to pay more to get the thing. And again, not within our particular world, but you've seen the impact with Apple's new iPhone and so on. Those costs have rocketed. Why? Because supply is not elastic. I would say it's never been harder to be a customer, and I really do try and take a customer-centric view here, because there are so many pressure points, and much like supply within silicon is not elastic, budgets are not limitless. So decision points need to be made, but they need to be made, I would say, intentionally rather than just falling forward. And your choice is, and I would also say it's not really a technical problem, it is a financial problem. But the fundamental reality for a business is the intentional decision you need to make is, are we going to try and survive this moment? Keep spending a disproportionate amount of our budget on things, or are we prepared to be brave, be different, and make a change? And those organizations that choose to thrive rather than survive they will leave this period, I think, with a competitive advantage in their field. So my guidance usually to customers, there is maybe no bad decision here, but make it intentionally. But if you are brave and if you're prepared to do something different, lots of your competition will choose to survive. So leave this period now, you'll have a 2-year competitive advantage. And I think that is really important. And my job, and I guess your job as well, is to help customers navigate this in a way where they can potentially achieve competitive advantage. Because at some point, someone in your organization is going to say, so you spent all the budget on some software, virtualization renewals and some DDR5 RAM. What are you doing about improving our cyber resilience posture? What are you doing about preparing our business for AI initiatives? What are you doing about supporting business growth? And the answer really can't be nothing, because I spent it all on a renewal and some DDR5. And I think that is the point where we go and help customers and say, there are other ways to do this. And we can create capacity within your existing budget to drive growth, drive innovation, improve cyber resilience, and so on.
And that's an interesting point. So, I mean, Steve, so beyond those cost implications that Paul's highlighted there, what do you see in terms of impacting, or the supply being impacting, that uncertainty of businesses trying to plan and deliver projects? How else do you see that manifesting itself, and what organizations are trying to do beyond just the cost implications?
I think there are two implications probably at either end of the spectrum. I think consumer grade cheap resources are probably going to be the most impactfully hit. I think the days, for example, of the 450 pound laptop are probably over. I think we've become too consumers, PlayStations and that kind of thing. We've been spoiled really over the last maybe decade with cheap electronic goods, and I think that the days of those are probably over. There is bigger margins and bigger. All businesses trade on confidence, and we know that the people manufacturing these finite resources will trade at the most confident level, so they will push to the highest margin they possibly can, especially, as Paul said, coming out of a lean period in the early to mid 2000s, where they kind of spent maybe 10 or 20 years not making much money, and not many people entering the market. But if we flip that over to who's consuming infrastructure, I think as a consequence of electronics fundamentally being cheaper than they probably should have been, I think we've all become a little bit lazy. So I think we've probably applied too many resources and too many servers, too many instances, too much storage is probably bigger than it needs to be. So I think fundamentally people need to look at the estate they've got and see what they can achieve with the estate they have. And maybe to echo Paul's point there, is that look at their business in 3 dimensions. It's not simply about the one thing you can solve this year and spend all your money. You have to keep all of those facets going forward and make sure your business matures at a reasonable pace, because as Paul says, the people coming out the end of this, it will be in a good competitive situation if they can weather the storm.
So just taking that one, that kind of suggests is that, some organizations will look to consolidate the usage of the resources that they may have over provisioned in those happier times, if you like, before all the spike in prices and the supply chain delivery challenges. But for those organizations that have potentially got a degree of legacy technology, and many organizations have that, right? They've either acquired it through acquisition, or it's an application that they developed many moons ago, and it's become a lifeblood or part of that organization's ethos and operation. How do you, I guess, what are the implications for those organizations that just simply can't secure any new infrastructure hardware over that next 12 to 18 months? So they may have the capital to be able to invest, but they simply can't get access. What are some of the challenges that they can face, or indeed how can they overcome those challenges? Paul, what are your thoughts there?
I think, to echo Steve's point, I think we all got fat and lazy when it was cheap. And whether that is virtualization, server deployment, amounts of RAM being used. So one of the first things, I think, again, in the spirit of being useful and trying to be helpful, how are you utilized? Can we help you drive up utilization within your environment? Then it's where else is there capacity in the system if there is simply not supply, and some products are heavily constrained, particularly around DDR5. So it kind of doesn't matter what you want to pay, they're just not available. And I would suggest in some instances, if you're being told they're available, I would ask twice, because there are only three sources, right? So in the end, there is finite supply. So then I think it is like, look at your wider ecosystem. Where is there capacity in the system that will align with your business strategy? So yeah, and again, if you're thinking about something like an AI deployment, again, that is multifaceted. Can I get GPUs? Can I get the RAM? Do I have the space? Do I have the power? And so on. So organizations such as Pulsant that, have a really unique strategy around edge deployment, proximity to customers, you have capacity. So budget is available, resources are not. You have capacity, you have proximity. So I think it's the whole thing of like, am I going to pretend this is not happening and try and survive, or am I going to try and thrive? And I think it's Steve, I think you certainly got to think three-dimensionally. You cannot just keep doing what you've always done. A, supply is not there. B, it's really expensive. So how do we help you on that journey? Think in different ways where you can be successful, deploy, and actually potentially end up with a better, more agile deployment model with a service provider, with what you've got, augmenting what you've got, because there is already capacity in the system with Pulsant, for example.
So on the assumption that that the old ethos that technology will always be available when I need it. So now organizations are having to, I guess, make some real practical longer term decisions on how they, I guess, service that supply chain. So what are 2 or 3 really sort of practical choices organizations can make today to avoid being stuck where they are for the next 12, 18, 24 months? What are some of those things that, if you were leading an organization, Steve, from a technical perspective, what would you be considering to try and mitigate that future supply constraints?
You need an amount of flexibility within your if you're traditionally a business that has run through capital cycles. I think you need to look at operationally what you can do to your budget in order to steal another point from Paul, is that to inject some agility into your organization. So we try to predict, certainly on an annual basis, what we would like to spend on infrastructure, because we see it as relatively inflexible. But when things outside of your control come to bear, you have to be more flexible. So I think that level of agility and inserting that both into your business thinking and your business risk kind of dynamics and analysis really needs to take hold. So yeah, having the ability to move some workloads into an IaaS provider, where connectivity, workload, and end user experience and the use case doesn't necessarily preclude it from doing so. I think using that as an example to move workloads, to inject that agility into your work stack is absolutely the way to go. And you're then not confined by forces that are outside of your control, but you may just have to adjust the way that you consume some of the services. So that capital outlay may have to come to a more of an OpEx type requirement.
Okay, so definitely organizations having to potentially rethink how they have historically already operated. So just looking ahead now, where we're midway through 2026, how long, and maybe how long is a piece of string, but how long do you expect some of these conditions, the supply chain, the supply and demand kind of constraints, how long do you really think they'll be in place, Paul? Do you see an end to this?
If I really knew the answer, Ian, I'd be doing a different job, and I'd probably be retired.
We'll be going short
if
or
I
long.
knew that, yeah, I'd be long and short on all sorts of different stock.
Yeah,
I think it's very hard to predict. I think that, as I kind of said before, the current manufacturers, there is a disincentive for them to solve for this quickly because they're making supernormal profits. There is also inelasticity in supply. So if they did want to solve it, they cannot solve it quickly, and more capacity is coming online. The third factor, which I think Steve touched on as well, there is an enormous financial barrier to entry. There is a reason why there are 3 or 4 NAND manufacturers. There's a reason why there are 3 or 4 RAM manufacturers. The cost is inordinate in standing up a fab. There is no advanced silicon manufacturing capability pretty much anywhere outside of South Korea and Taiwan, a little bit in Japan. By advanced, I mean 2 nanometer technology. And then even if you have got unlimited money and can work incredibly quickly, ASML, who are the only company that produce advanced lithographic machines, have a 2-year wait for a lithographic machine. So if you're not already in the queue, so that, talks to what is the length of resolution here. So these are like data points rather than anecdotal, the hyperscaler is going to spend more or, whatever. They will continue to spend until the market demands that they stop spending, because that in itself has been an interesting shift, where if you look at the financial makeup of the big hyperscalers, historically, very infrastructure lean, very profitable. Their balance sheet now looks more like Exxon, because it is now so capital heavy, and the market have not liked that. Because fundamentally, all of that investment, as Steve, I think you and I touched on this in a previous conversation, what if it stops? But what if it doesn't? No one can predict that. We're basically watching the largest speculation probably in history in the financial markets. But they've gone out to the bond markets, they've taken on a load of debt, they're buying now infrastructure that currently doesn't exist, currently for demand that doesn't exist. It's a bet. And I think it would be super interesting, despite my obvious boyish good looks, I went through the dot-com boom, and there are definitely, not to be a naysayer, there are shades of this, writ large once again. I think even the percentage of the Magnificent Seven as it relates to the S&P 500, it outstrips what was happening in the dot-com era. So there's lots of canaries in the coal mine. This does not get solved quickly for all the reasons I've stated. Inelasticity in demand, barrier to entry financially, even ASML.
Okay. So given these market conditions, and from what you've just articulated there is no quick fix. It takes time to build a factory. There are only so many people manufacturing. What are HPE and its partners doing, or how are they helping customers, both new and prospective customers, existing customers? How are you helping them adapt their infrastructure strategies? What advice are you giving them? How are you guiding them through these challenging times?
The first thing I've touched on this already, be really intentional. What is critical path, and how can we help you optimize your environment? How can we bring in our broader ecosystem? We have a very long lineage of work in the managed service provider community with your good sales, for example. So it's how do we bring that to bear to bring a kind of more three-dimensional solution? So stop doing what you've always done, because frankly you can't continue either from a supply side or a cost side. So be deliberate, be intentional. How can we, being HPE, how can you as our partners come in and have a very deliberate conversation with customers, and I think help the technology function manage up better? I think historically as an industry, we don't do a great job of things like business case, ROI, TCO, payback period, because if you're going to have to go back to the board and you're going to ask for more money, you need to be clear why, and then what is the payback period on that. And again, these are conversations that I get brought into. I'll share a very brief anecdote. I was asked to fly to Ireland to meet a very large government customer. They're very angry, everything's really expensive, and I kind of understand, because whilst I talk about this every day, customers buy every 5 years or so. And he was like, I set a 5-year budget, and in less than 18 months I've blown it to pieces. So then my role again in the guise of helping is, I need to help you be able to articulate this. Where can we help you optimize that environment to minimize spend? But the overriding principle, given we are not at the top of the market, is get to a quick yes or a quick no. Because if you have a problem today, in 1 quarter's time, I can assure you it's more expensive. So that problem becomes bigger. Buying now or changing the way that you consume from CapEx to OpEx or other, but doing it intentionally and quickly, is now cost avoidance. Gone are the days of price erosion, which in my career has almost been a universal truth, bar a few blips in COVID and so on. Cost has gone up exponentially. Some SKUs of some particular parts of RAM I've seen go up 800%. So I've never seen that in my career. So I think that, again, it all comes down to how can we help, and we have to support with things like business case, ROI, TCO, and payback period, but also be prepared to be brave and challenge. Stop doing what you've always done, because that is not going to work.
I think when you look at it in terms of, it's backed up with evidence in a sense of it's not, organizations, I guess, deliberately inflating the market, deliberately creating a shortage. There is unprecedented amount of demand driven by AI, driven by other use cases, but also then very much a constraint on the supply, not least through some of the macroeconomic situations we've lived in the last 2-3 years, and certainly most recently, but also the time taken to actually manufacture or create the capability to manufacture more. It's not a case of turning on the tap. It's wait 2 years whilst a factory is built, a specific machinery is ordered and installed. So I mean, on that basis, Steve, are you seeing an increase from clients who are looking at infrastructure as a service, so moving away from that capital purchase of owning my own assets? I can no longer own them, actually leasing them, taking a different consumption-based model. Are you seeing clients exploring that more these days?
Certainly. I mean, maybe akin to Paul's example there, organizations, and certainly those that I'd class at the enterprise level, are used to budgeting in a certain way over certain cycles. I think in some ways this may come, when hindsight's wonderful, isn't it? But you can look back and you could say we could see this coming. But certainly this financial year, we're seeing clients that would traditionally have done business and capitalized investment and brought capital to bear in a certain way, and their IT director and their IT department would stand up new solutions, and then there'd be in this cycle of every 4 to 5 years they'd buy some equipment, they'd deploy, they'd give themselves some headroom, some expansion, they'd allow themselves to deliver business required function through that platform, through that 5-year life cycle. Now we're seeing that those plans, whether you look at the ramp of the problem or just where we are at the moment, customers that I think that I class as sophisticated, as I say, enterprise class, are coming to us asking about how they can fulfill their business obligations, whether it be expansion, so from the infrastructure they have to expand and facilitate change in their organization, or where the infrastructure they currently use as a platform, whether it be storage or compute, is at the end of life, and they have specifically kind of biting governance criteria and frameworks in their organization. And actually, they need to seriously consider how they might continue to store that person's people or clients' data, or how they might go about in making sure their business is at the forefront of what they're trying to achieve. And we don't put any kind of commercial reins on the organization by not being able to deliver a technical platform to deliver revenue. So we're seeing, I think, just to reiterate the point, some quite sophisticated people with long-term experience in the industry having to behave in different ways in order to solve what is a reasonably stable problem, but kind of manifesting in a more urgent way.
Okay, I mean, you've touched on there, and kind of brings us nicely onto the last section I really wanted to kind of bring into this, and that's the broader strategic considerations of organizations. We talk very much around supply chain availability of RAM and storage components, but from if you're a business leader today, well, what other considerations should they be thinking around that drives that? Data sovereignty, for example. Are we seeing that really as a driver? Is it something a lot of people are talking about, but we're okay, we're in a hyperscaler? What's your view on those broader strategic considerations that organizations should be really thinking about today?
So for me, it's probably two aspects. So again, part of the geography that I cover is in the Middle East, and there are very strict data sovereignty laws. Also, as an observer, it's fascinating to see what is playing out in Europe right now around data sovereignty. French government bodies even removing Windows and stopping using Teams, all of these kind of things. And these are not done for no good reason. My concern as a citizen is this does not seem to be a government priority. And again, there's a fascinating case in France where I think it was a legal counsel of Microsoft France were being deposed, and of the conversation of the US Cloud Act comes up, which I don't again think is broadly understood, certainly by UK government. And they were asked a very direct question: can you ensure that no French citizen's government will leave France? And the legal counsel said no. I don't know why it falls on such deaf ears in the UK. I think there's a very strong lobby group, lots of very glossy marketing and so on. But as a citizen, it bothers me. I think we should be concerned about it in a really more volatile geopolitical world. So that is something that I would like to see us embrace more as a discourse to be had, parliamentary and generally as an industry. We know that is not a panacea. We know some of the hyperscalers are at capacity. We know that hyperscaler costs have gone up 40+%. Again, that is not hyperbole. I work with a very large UK customer that is in this very unfortunate position where on one hand, they have done their own TCO analysis and can run workloads now on-prem for 25% of what they're paying a hyperscaler. But there is a supply problem, which means they cannot repatriate. So they are now stuck knowingly paying massively over. So again, when we think about how could you help, how do we help our customers address things? Well, then don't bring it back on-prem, but also don't keep it in a hyperscaler. There are other ways to address this, and we need to challenge them and support them in terms of optimizing and navigating this route. The other thing perhaps that I'll wrap with is where people are being forced to make decisions. I'm seeing people make decisions where they are consciously, and when I say consciously, they are telling me we are now deploying in a suboptimal way. We know we are acquiring tech debt because we're trying to fumble our way through a situation, fudge it, and when things are better, I have to go back and fix it. It's going to cost me a lot more. So that does not feel right. Again, that's a real, short-term view of addressing that. But also when people are fudging, Ian, they are also potentially creating a much bigger attack surface from a cyber resilience, cyber recovery standpoint. And that, again, as a citizen of the UK, when I'm watching large customers that have decommissioned technology, literally bring it back out of a skip, recommission it, not wanting to pay support contracts on pretty major software, that then you're probably not getting the security patches. The ripple out effect for us as citizens and our industry is potentially profound. So our role in helping them say, I know you've got a problem, let me help you navigate this problem, because this is not the way. Because you might save a few $100,000 on some servers or whatever. The minute you're attacked, is it national critical infrastructure? Like, tens of millions to resolve? Your problem's much bigger then.
It certainly feels, well, interesting is always a good word to use. It's an interesting time to be in IT, to be trying to support the growth of your business on a very uncertain footing. I'd certainly, obviously there's a number of people who've kindly joined the webinar. If there's any questions anybody has, certainly please feel free to add them into the chat, and I can direct them to Paul and Steve accordingly. Steve, from your perspective, whilst we're waiting for some potential questions to come in, if you were to give one message, and Paul, I'll come to you after this, so you've got time to think, one message that you would like, business leaders, technology decision makers to come away from with today's, discussion, what would that one thing be? We've covered many different things, but what would that one thing be that they need to consider?
I think try and plan further afield, try and plan in flexibility. You should be concerned about where your data is, and going back to the real kind of early tenets of technology, you should be cognizant of the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of your information. You should know not only where it is, but who can reach it. So I think sovereignty and jurisdiction are very, very key things that I think some people interchange but aren't actually the same thing. I think people need to be mindful of that. We all as individuals and as citizens, as Paul says, need to be mindful about where our information is and who has access to it, and our online kind of fingerprint and profile. But organizations, more than anyone that we entrust our information to, need to be much, much more diligent about what they do and where it is. And at the moment, economically, they might be tempted to make compromises, but they really should just think about what they need to do, how they can take their business forward and retain the integrity of the information they hold. That is absolutely key.
No, that's a very fair point. And we actually do have an offline question. And Paul, I'll bring it to yourself first because you mentioned a couple of client examples. So the question is, can you share an example of a customer who is navigating the shortages well? What are they doing differently?
History will say whether customers have done it well or not, because people are reacting. And as I said, I've got customers saying, I know that I'm doing the wrong thing long term, but it's all I've got. I think customers that are doing it well have a really strong linkage between the technology function, the business function, and senior leadership, because these are unprecedented times for us, and we're in technology. So if you're a senior leader of a business, you're running a business unit, it's like, why is all of that so expensive? Or why can I not just put it there on some shadow IT? And I think having that close alignment, again, it's a word that I've used a lot and use a lot generally at the moment. It's about intentionality. IT are not an island. And if they are, they will fail because ultimately their constituents that they're serving is the business. So we need to help IT and technology leaders be able to articulate better into line of business and leadership. Why is this happening? What is the implication? So can I say somebody that is doing it well? It varies. I certainly see people that are doing it poorly, which is a negative way to answer the question. And where I see that is where technology are not communicating to the business, where they are cobbling it together, and then we will end up reading about it on the front page of a newspaper because they're avoiding the difficult conversations, challenging the business with the realities of our market. And okay, if you want to give me X more money, either I cannot support business growth or I'm about to grow our attack surface significantly. That is a board level priority. We're going to read about it. So I think we need to be braver. So I know it's a bit of a kind of roundabout way of, but I see it done poorly more than I see it done well. I think people are trying and are well intended, but I think we have a responsibility collectively to help.
So actually, it's less about the technology, but actually how organizations are structured to collaborate and work together to actually understand the implications. Is more that approach is going to set an organization up, better to, I guess, survive or thrive indeed through these challenging times. Steve, would you echo that? Would you have a different viewpoint?
No, it's quite similar actually. I think that in times like this where technology does not stand still and businesses can't stand still either, but I think in more now than maybe before, the decisions about how to move forward need to be taken in concert with the business leaders and the stakeholders, because if technologists are making decisions that put their business at risk, that is fundamentally kind of undermining the whether it be the go-to-market, whether it be the information they retain, whether it be them being custodians of information the general public give them. They are fundamentally undermining their offer, if you like. So anything they're considering doing, they need stakeholder management. Their executive structure needs to be fully informed and come along with the risk with them. But I would try and instill some sort of financial flexibility in what people are trying to do. They need some OPEX and some capital outlay, and they need to blend the two to do what's right for their business during, as Paul said, these kind of unprecedented times.
No, thank you. And just drawing this to a close because we're almost at time. Paul, Steve, thank you for your insights. Really do appreciate that, and some of those anecdotal, I guess, client points. I mean, the key message I think as we move through this is, organizations can no longer assume infrastructure availability, pricing stability, predictability of lead times. They're three, I guess, areas which were very known and very safe, for want of a better term, in the past, no longer the case. But it's those organizations that plan ahead, that collaborate and collaborate in an honest fashion together with other stakeholders in their business, that can then build flexibility into their strategies and underpin it with I guess, the right sized technology for now and moving forward. Those are the organizations that are not just going to survive, but potentially thrive and gain competitive advantage through these, as I say, unprecedented times. So with that, I'll draw it to a close. As I say, Paul, Steve, thank you very much for your time today. Hopefully everybody on the webinar has taken away some useful tidbits, and they can take it back into their organizations as food for thought and things that they can act upon. Thank you very much for your time, gentlemen.
Thank you
Thank
both.
you.
Thank you for your
Thanks, Ian.
partnership.
Cheers.
Appreciate it.
Thanks,
Thank
Paul.
you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.